This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us on this Tuesday's program, we begin with K-State Swine Extension Specialist Joel DeRouchey. He shares insight into the upcoming 2022 Swine Day, which is taking place November 17th. Also ahead, K-State Assistant State Climatologist Matt Sittel and K-State Meteorologist Chip Redmond join us for an overview of the drought challenges that we have continued to face this year and how they measure up historically. They go month by month explaining the data behind the conditions and the events that led up to this difficult year. We end with K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk. He discusses the benefits of giving 2 to 3 week old calves additional colostrum. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Joel DeRouchey. He is a K-State Swine Extension Specialist, and he's joining us today to preview the upcoming 2022 Swine Day. So, Joel, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. So, like I said, this is the 2022 Swine Day. This is a long-running program here at K-State. So, what can we expect this year?
Yeah, as we have in the past, we're really excited to host our KSU Swine Day and have a large number of our Kansas producers and allied industry and many former students come back from different states that they live in to be part of this event, to share information and receive information that we have generated this last year in the swine area. And the program itself is on Thursday, November 17th, and we host that at the Alumni Center here on the K-State campus. And the day is really set up to provide new information, education to producers and our supporting allied industry in all aspects of swine production, particularly in the areas of nutrition, management, feed processing, and feed safety.
Absolutely. And from what I understand, producers that attend are going to get a wide array of updates, like you just mentioned, from the university. Specifically, what are some of those that they can expect to hear about this year?
Yeah, so this year we'll have over 40 research reports in the publication that'll be provided. And really through the nutrition side, we focus a lot this last year on improving nursery pig growth, performance, and health, especially the first couple weeks after weaning. Pigs generally are a little slower to get on feed with some of the genetics today. And what we have done is tried to look at ways that we improve their growth performance and particularly their survivability, livability after weaning. And so we'll present a number of research projects in that regard. We're also going to highlight a number of projects where we've been looking at mineral use, and it's particularly with calcium and phosphorus. There's continued efforts to look at to improve the structural integrity, which leads to longevity of both our commercial side, but then also on our replacement females and sows. And we've been doing a lot of work looking at calcium and phosphorus status in pigs and trying to understand better, not only better feeding practices, but also help our diagnostic teams on the veterinary side understand when pigs may be deficient or when they're not, relative to very old book values that are used, just trying to update those for our modern genetics. We'll also have sections on feed processing. We all recognize that feed processing is so important to obtain optimal feed efficiency and feeding practices, as well as in our feed safety group that's continuing to evaluate different practices, feed additives, feed technologies to reduce viruses, to improve just general feed safety, as it's clearly been shown over the last couple of years that feed has probably been a vector for disease transmission in a number of cases. And so they're just looking to continue to look at ways to improve that aspect, to have improved biosecurity through the feeding of our animals on our swine farms.
Absolutely. And obviously with all of the topics covered, the swine industry is such a diverse industry in that it takes a lot of different diverse groups to make it work. And that's evident in this Swine Day preview that you're giving us here. So it's not only the animal science department, it's other departments as well, correct?
That's exactly right. And we work very closely with our grain science department. Everybody recognizes that our grain science department for decades and decades has been viewed as one of the leaders in the feed processing area for our livestock. And so we have a very strong partnership with them on the swine side. And we'll highlight some of that information that they've been working on and that we jointly work together. The other aspect in the afternoon, we're very excited to have Dr. Steve Pullman come and speak to our entire group. And he's going to be talking about the past major innovations and looking forward to the new emerging technologies that will be involved in the swine industry. Steve actually started his career as an extension swine specialist at Kansas State University several years ago. He then worked in the industry in different nutrition roles and really spent the majority of his career working for the Murphy Brown operations, overseeing their Western operations in the Midwest and out in Utah. Steve is a tremendous mind, a tremendous speaker, and we're really excited to have him back to K-State where he started his career to really talk about some important issues, looking at the innovation and technology side that's really starting to continue to build and encompass the new adoption of practices in our industry.
Absolutely. As innovation and technology continues to grow, as does our industries, especially in animal sciences, adapting and growing with them, which is incredible. And looking forward to hearing from Dr. Steve Pullman, like you said, but also some graduate students. This is an opportunity for some senior grad students in the department to really showcase their efforts in the research they've been doing.
Yeah, we're always excited. I mean, that's, we talk about over 40 research reports will be provided and all the research that comes with it. And our graduate students complete that work. And so we were certainly going to highlight and have some of them speak as well on what they've been able to accomplish over this last year and highlight them as they look to have careers in our swine industry and give them that opportunity to meet and have that exposure with the large crowd that attends.
Absolutely. Hoping to get them here on Agriculture Today. So in the coming weeks, listeners, if you're looking to hear some of that research that is being conducted by these graduate students here at K-State, stay tuned for that in the coming weeks ahead. But Joel, you mentioned that this event's taking place in November. So listeners have plenty of time to register. And how can they do that?
Yeah, so the early registration is due November 10th. And you can find all information about KSU Swine Day at our website, which is ksuswine.org. So that's ksuswine.org, and that'll take you to our swine extension page. It has the full registration information, the full program that you'll be able to access. And again, that early registration date is November 10th. But we have a number of people who come the day of. The pre-registration cost is $25. On-site registration is $50.
Absolutely. So definitely some incentive there to register ahead of time. And before we close out, Joel, anything else you'd like to mention about this exciting event?
Yeah, along with the speaking side and information that's presented, we have a large industry trade show. We'll have over 30 different vendors that have tabletop booths that will be able to display information and technologies they have that would be supporting of our swine farmers and those involved in the industry. And our Kansas Pork Association and others are really strong partners in this to provide a very economical way to get a lot of swine education and information to our producers.
Absolutely. Well, an excellent opportunity for those interested for sure. So everyone be sure to register ahead of time and attend this event. But Joel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Joel DeRouchey. He is a K-State Swine Extension Specialist previewing their upcoming 2022 Swine Day. Before we cut to a short break here momentarily, a quick word from Mary Marsh from the Kansas Wheat Commission for a Wheat Scoop update.
Persistent drought after harvest and delayed planting could indicate a lower risk of wheat streak mosaic virus this year. Still, experts caution producers to continue monitoring and managing volunteer wheat as they plant this fall. Right now, we're thinking there is slightly lower risk of wheat streak heading into the fall planting, largely due to extended drought that has limited the emergence of volunteer, especially out west, said Kelsey Anderson-Onifree, K-State Wheat and Forage Extension Specialist. But the caveat is that there are still other hosts for curl mites out there in the landscape. In 2021, wheat streak mosaic virus was the third most significant disease to strike the Kansas wheat crop loss, according to Kansas Cooperative Plant Disease Survey report released in December 2021. Statewide, the estimated yield loss was 3.1%, equivalent to 11.6 million bushels. The spike in disease pressure resulted from heavy germination of volunteer wheat in late summer and early fall 2020. The report noted this would have created a green bridge upon which a wheat curl mite, the vector that transmits the virus, was able to survive between 2020 harvest and 2021 planting. This year's harvest had the opposite weather. It has been and continues to be very dry. As a result, Anderson-Onifree explained she received mixed reports from across the state. Anderson-Onifree warns growers not to be complacent in controlling volunteer wheat. Even in areas that did not have volunteer wheat emerge immediately after harvest, several other grassy species can play a host to wheat curl mites. Bermuda grass, barnyard grass, green foxtail, downy brome, rye brome, just to name a few. Anderson-Onofre also cautioned producers grazing cattle on volunteer wheat or who have fields neighboring grazing pastures to balance short-term forage needs with potential long-term impacts on next year's harvest. For these producers, her first suggestion is to make sure to destroy the remaining volunteer ahead of planting wheat or entering a fallow period. Another suggestion for high-risk fields is to plant wheat streak mosaic virus-resistant varieties like KS Dallas or Plains Gold Guardian. Still, she reminded producers that these varieties only protect against one of the viruses that cause wheat streak mosaic virus and may not provide protection against High Plains virus or Triticum mosaic virus. Additionally, these varieties have a resistance gene that is temperature sensitive and turns off at high temperatures. For producers who have only recently had volunteers show up in the fields within the past couple of weeks, Anderson-Onofre is less worried. If the green bridge was disrupted in the drought-stricken period after harvest, there may not have been enough mites to cause severe infection via this fresh flush of volunteer. Additionally, later planted dates in cooler weather are less favorable for infection as mite populations are less active and reproducing less aggressively. Managing for wheat streak mosaic virus doesn't stop at planting. Producers should monitor for wheat streak mosaic virus throughout the growing season. Sometimes producers can see fall symptoms if the weather stays warm, but typically symptoms won't show until green up period next April or May. Symptomatic leaves will display dark green coloring and light yellow discolorations. Infected fields often will not head out well or will have low grain fill. Symptoms typically are more severe on the edge of the field and fan inward. Learn more about how to stop the streak at kswheat.com/wheatstreak. With Kansas Wheat, this is Mary Marsh.
Once again, that was Mary Marsh from the Kansas Wheat Commission providing a wheat scoop update. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. We are back now with two guests. Matt Sittel, he is our assistant state climatologist, as well as Chip Redmond, our K-State meteorologist. And they're joining us today to cover historical growing season comparisons, as well as what we've experienced to date. So let's start with a little bit of an overall perspective, what we've really looked at in the growing season this year and why it's so significant.
Well, I want to start by talking about the growing season. What do we mean by a growing season? Because traditionally, growing season begins after the last freeze of the year. But since that changes from year to year and from location to location within the state of Kansas, it's easier to talk about a growing season if we define a specific start date. And we are going to talk about April 1st as being our start date. That allows us to compare multiple years to one another. Now, for this growing season, we started April 1st of 2022. We came off a 12-month period prior to that where we had 4 inches less precipitation than we normally do. And we were also the 15th warmest 12-month period on record. We have 128 years of climate data, or at least for divisional data, in the Kansas climate record. So 15th is a fairly high number. We had 78% of the state was drought-free at the start of April 2021, but by the start of 22, we were down to only 28% drought-free. So we were already on this road to a much worse situation that we're seeing now. The DSCI, that's a number that's called the Drought Severity Coverage Index, and I want to take a moment just to describe what that is. It's used in conjunction with the weekly drought maps that are issued by the U.S. Drought Monitor. It's a single number that attempts to describe the overall drought conditions across the state of Kansas. Now, those of your listeners who are familiar with the map know that there are different colors and categories that appear on those maps, ranging from D0 to D4. The higher the number, the worse the drought category is. What this index does is for every percent of the state that's D4, they assign it 5 points. For D3, it's 4 points, and so on down to D0, which is 1 point. Now, if we have any area that's drought-free, that's 0 points. So at the start of April 2021, we were at 36. Come forward to April of 2022, and we were at 194. So a much higher number. Now, historically speaking, this number only goes back to the year 2000. Thankfully, 500 is the highest possible number you can have. We have never had 500 for an index. We had 463. That's the highest on record. That occurred in August of 2012. We have had 0, fortunately, but the last time it happened was July of 2019. And as it turns out, less than 10% of the time in the history, this 23-year history of the DSCI, have we had the entire state be drought-free. So having at least part of the state in drought status is very normal.
But not obviously on the scale that we've seen recently, like you mentioned. And part of that, Chip, I think has to do with this La Nina weather pattern we've really been experiencing, right?
Yeah, this is the third year. We're entering the third winter of La Nina conditions, and it's only the third time it's ever happened. We had it happen centered around 1999 and then around 1974. So we don't have a really good historical background on how often this occurs and really what the impacts are. We just don't have enough data. But obviously last year was pretty thick in people's minds of just how extreme, especially going into winter, was. And, with the precedents we've already set with this growing season, it makes us really concerned about what's to come this winter.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I guess mentioned that we started off on a really bad start to begin with. We weren't experiencing great conditions, but obviously as the season has gone on this year, things have just gotten progressively worse and worse. And at this point, Matt, I think you've mentioned Kansas is the worst in terms of drought throughout the country right now?
Right now, 26% of Kansas is in D4 status. There is no other state in the nation right now that has that high a percentage. Oklahoma is second with 18%.
So our region definitely not doing great right now. But let's talk about month by month how this came to be about, some of the numbers that we actually saw.
Sure. Like I mentioned earlier, we started April of 22 with a DSCI of 194. April, much below normal precipitation. That brought the number up to 225. And we lost 8% more of the state to drought. Only 20% of the state was drought-free. We moved into May. May is, climatologically speaking, our wettest month. And for some parts of the state, it was very wet. We averaged 3 inches of rain in the western part of the state to 5 inches in the east. Western Kansas had about 2 inches for the month of May. Central, 5.5 to 7.5 inches of rain in the eastern third of the state. That brought the DSCI back down to, I believe it was 178. So it was an improvement over the 225 that we had at the end of April. June, we got lower still. We were down to 148 by the end of June because we also had moisture in most of the state. Western Kansas, unfortunately, that was the part of the state that really never got the good moisture. Nevertheless, at the end of June, 43% of the state was drought-free, believe it or not. That was as good as it got, unfortunately, because as we moved into the third quarter of the year, weather patterns changed for the worse.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got here in May. That's when I first moved to Kansas, and I remember getting here. It was beautiful. It was windy still. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then as the month went on and went into July eventually, I was like, oh my goodness, is Kansas normally this way? Because I'm used to almost daily precipitation in Alabama in the summer, and we just don't get that here. It was brutal.
It was definitely. August was really our worst month, at least from a historical standpoint. It was the 7th driest August on record for the state of Kansas. All divisions of the state had deficits, 1 to up to 2.5 inches of precipitation. And at that point, DSCI is now at 272 by the end of August. And we've got 10% of the state in D4 status. And I said we're at 26% now. So if you do the math, you say, well, gosh, we went from 10 to 26% throughout the month of September into the first week of October. Because it turned out, if we look at the 7-day period at the end of September into early October, that was the driest 7-day period we've had this entire year. It was December of 2021 the last time we had less moisture on average across the state of Kansas.
Seasonally, Chip, we kind of expect that, though, in our winters here, right? It's usually kind of dry.
Yeah, our winters are our driest time of the year. Typically, any rain event we get is a widespread event that usually covers a larger area and brings uniform rainfall or snowfall, hopefully. The problem, especially with summer and developing these deficits really quickly, is that we rely on thunderstorm activity and clusters of thunderstorms to really focus and hit areas repeatedly. And we just didn't get that this summer. We did have some localized thunderstorms, but they were sparsely spread throughout the state, and there wasn't really any continuity to it. A lot of that was just due to stagnant high pressure across the plains, as well as the monsoons played a role as well. We were so close to all this moisture in the southwest, which was definitely different than what the southwest had seen the last year or two. Where they had been very dry and they hadn't had much monsoonal activity. And so with that moisture so close to us and then going up north and around us and basically missing the central plains, it really made the dry, warm conditions difficult.
Absolutely. So as we summarize the season up to this point, what really did we see? And hopefully we'll have some optimism here in what we can expect.
I don't think things can get much worse, honestly. The period July through September is the driest on record ever for southeast Kansas. They averaged 3.8 inches of rain for that 3-month period. Normally they get 12.1 inches. Adjacent south central Kansas, the second driest on record. In addition to that, both of those divisions had one of their top 10 warmest July through September periods ever. So you combine much above normal temperatures, much below normal precipitation. That's really a worst-case scenario for the drought.
Absolutely. And then, Chip, going into outlooks here, any optimism for what's to come as we go into the winter and even 2023?
Well, we got to focus on the optimism. Just a couple of things is that, when we look at statewide precipitation and temperature, we come in really close with the year 2000. And that was actually the third year of the most recent triple-dip La Nina event. So a little bit of an analog there considering our summer numbers. Now, we've already diverged a little bit with some of our fall where we haven't got some of the moisture, but we saw a big change in 2000 to 2021 where conditions did trend more neutral just after that, and we saw a switch to much colder and wetter conditions and snow. Now, for that to happen this year, we're going to need a couple of things to fall into play. We have put a lot of precipitation to our west. We kind of shifted that drought from the Rockies into the Central Plains. So there is a little bit more moisture out west that may help aid some of those storm systems, especially with southwest flow, which is typically a very dry flow for the state, may moderate that some and help maybe move a dry line further to our west and maybe get some of the thunderstorm activity we need in the spring. Between now and spring, we're looking and hoping for that change. And right now, the Climate Prediction Centers continue to keep Kansas in below normal precipitation and above normal temperatures through the end of the year. However, there's some hope that with the La Nina combined with even some impacts of the volcano that erupted in the southern hemisphere, it's put a lot of moisture in the atmosphere and has actually scattered a lot of the radiation outward and let the stratosphere cool down. And that could play a role in helping us get a more active or a weaker Arctic oscillation, also known as the polar vortex, which could potentially lead to more cold air outbreaks and maybe just generally active weather come the new year. So with that, the Climate Prediction Centers put us under equal chances, which is a big improvement from the negative. So we're in equal chances for precipitation, above, below, or near normal, as well as temperature. We can only hope that we start to see some of that cold air intrude and maybe with some moisture. Unfortunately, that typically means a northwest flow, which is typically a drier flow for us. We need to shift this whole pattern west about a couple hundred miles, but we'll take the cool air. The other thing to think about is that La Nina has been prominent the last 2 years. We've never had a quadruple year. So the hope would be that we do trend neutral as the models are expecting us to, and we can finally start to break this pattern.
Lots of hope to come for the new year and beyond that, hopefully for those tuning in. I know that's what they're hoping for as well. But thank you both so much for this very comprehensive overview. I hope it was helpful for listeners in understanding why we're in the position we are in currently and hopefully some optimism for what's to come. But thank you both so much. Once again, that was Matt Sittel. He is our assistant climatologist, as well as Chip Redmond, our meteorologist here at K-State, covering our historical growing season and hopefully some optimistic outlooks to come. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. In addition to the sound treatment protocols already in place for treating calf scours, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that research shows that replacing milk or milk replacers with colostrum in the second week of life gives calves a boost.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning another treatment for calf scours. I know many of you have very sound treatment protocols for calf scours, and we do a really good job of trying to get colostrum into these calves early. However, if you look back through your calf records, you'll probably realize that along about the second week of life, usually between about day 10 and day 14, you'll have a fairly high percentage of your calves that actually break with an event of scours. Our standard treatment protocols generally include some supportive therapy, so we'll use some electrolytes. We'll generally keep them on feed. If they're running a temperature, many times we use an antibiotic to try to help fight off the bacterial infection that they are experiencing. As we think about scours, there's different types of scours that we can have, obviously, because there are different organisms that cause that. But one of the things that scours actually does in the animal, and one of the reactions that we get, is that we get some inflammation of the lining of the intestinal tract. And in some cases, the cells in the intestinal tract will actually rupture. And that's the reason why we see bloody scours in some cases. So as we look at our treatment arsenal, there might be another thing that we could add that might actually give us an advantage. Some recent research shows that if we use colostrum, yes, you probably have some extra colostrum around the farm, but if we use colostrum maybe in place of the milk or milk replacer that we would feed, or if we have some dried colostrum available, powder, we could mix that in with the feed that we're already feeding, and that would give them a boost. So why would we do that? Well, when you think about colostrum and the things that are in the colostrum is really packed with a lot of vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and also B vitamins. There are also very high levels of essential minerals. So, compared to standard milk from the cow or from milk later in lactation, there's a lot more immunoglobulins involved as well. So there's a higher protein content there, as well as some additional changes to the fat lipids. So there's some additional lipids in that colostrum that can help the animal fight disease. So a feeding or two of colostrum to those animals that break with scours, again in that basically second week of life, in addition to some of the other things you're doing, will actually maybe help them get over it quicker. One of the things that is contained in that colostrum are compounds that would help with the inflammation that we see in the intestinal tract. So feeding or two of colostrum along with your standard treatments may actually have a very positive impact on the recovery of those animals. In some cases, there have been some trials that have looked at using colostrum actually as the treatment for scours. In other words, removing antibiotics. So if you're on your farm, if antibiotic use is something that you need to curtail because of the fact that you're shipping organic milk or organic produced animals, it would be an option that you could use to help treat those animals that do break with scours. Probably happen, and actually it happens to a fair percentage of our calves that we have on our dairy farm. Another thing is we think about moving into the winter months. We always have this discussion about calf jackets. So just a rule of thumb, if you're wearing a hoodie this morning as you go out to feed calves, it's probably cool enough that some of your younger calves, those that are less than 3 weeks of age, should probably be wearing a jacket because they're feeling that cooler temperature as well. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take a look at the scours treatment program that they have on their farm and considering maybe adding a colostrum treatment to that procedure.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.